molecules from the dead. We liberate inanimate objects. Is this a sign of wheeling ahead? Or are we predestined to get what we get? Drawn to your face like never before. Even the mistakes aren't really mistakes at all. I wanna confess that you're on it, and we don't rest if we're lonely. There's innocence in the moment. Maybe now's the time to be alive. We've been dressed as humans. We've been kings and homeless. Still we're just fragments of a great collide. I wanna confess that you own me, and we don't rest if we're lonely.
I've been up here before. I always thought, how do you stand up here in these lights? Like the FBI training in on you. And where were you last night?
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Just to make sure you're in the right panel, this panel's called Innovative Solutions on Workforce Housing. So if you're in the right panel, glad you're with us today. My name is Shawn Kessel, and I'm the CEO and Deputy Commerce Commissioner. Very excited to be here today to talk to you about housing. It's one of the three things that the MSI team continually hears in terms of hurdles when we go across across North Dakota. The top three things that we hear all the time are childcare, workforce, and housing. And not necessarily in that order, but almost every community, those seem to be the top three hurdles. So over the course of the last about 8 months, there was a task force that was put together, and if Don Matt is in the room, she needs a shout out, because Don Matt from the Regional Council up in Grafton did a really nice job of bringing people together to really talk about this issue. And the task that we took on was to identify all of the opportunities and programming that exist today, find the gaps, and see if we can't find a way to close those gaps. So we've got a wonderful panel for you today who's going to kind of go over some of those solutions, some of those gaps, some of the reasons that we think housing is difficult. And so I'm really excited about the panel that's before you. I'd like to start with Carol Peterson. She's the Economic Development Coordinator from Milnor, North Dakota. And she's going to start on missing middle. So Carol, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Shawn. Milnor is located in the southeast part of the state, but like most communities in North Dakota, we are short on housing. Whether it's multifamily housing, single family, a variety of issues. And so I've been visiting with a lot of people at the state level for the last year, trying to do some problem solving, coming up with some ideas on what we could do. And at one point, I was approached by the Department of Commerce and Josh, and we were lucky enough to be a pilot program to do a project. And so I think I'll let Josh explain it, and then I will just come back with some of the reasons I think it's a good idea.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. And if we can pull up the slide deck that's on the screen in front of me. That'd be great. My name is Josh Askvig. I'm the state director for AARP in North Dakota. I do not work for the Department of Commerce, so they're great people. We have a wonderful collaboration, but if you're looking for funding from the Department of Commerce, it is not me as part of it. But quickly, because oftentimes folks wonder, what is AARP doing at the Main Street Conference? Why does AARP care about Main Street Summit? Why do we get involved in livable work? And it goes really back to kind of our mission. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. Our mission is dedicated to improving the life for those 50 and older to help choose how they live as they age. And as you'll see in the statement that's up on the screen behind me, okay, AARP works to strengthen communities and advocate for what matters most to families and focus on health, security, financial stability, personal fulfillment, et cetera. But I highlighted the statement there of strengthen communities because it really is about that. And if you want further evidence of why we care about that, you have a map of North Dakota in front of you. We've heard great statistics in the last number of years about North Dakota has had the fastest growing population and has trended younger, and that is true. But you will also see there are still plenty of areas in the state of North Dakota, and I was just talking to Dave about this because I know he just recently released his housing needs assessment study that they've been doing as part of it. What you're looking at is a map, and the map is colored by the percent of the population age 65 and plus. And in short, the darker the color purple, the higher the percentage of the county, it's county by county, that is 65 and older. So there are certain counties, certainly in the middle of the state and certain pockets that over 25% of the county is age 65 and older. And so we do a number of things. We do livable communities work about best practices, story sharing, publications, resources, technical support, which is what I'm going to talk about now and what Carol is referencing that we ended up getting teamed up with, as well as peer support. And so quickly clicking through those things to get to this. We had a goal last year, and we've been working very closely with Maria and her team and Shawn's team at the Department of Commerce to kind of think about how can we identify a pilot project to model what we call at AARP missing middle housing. So this middle income housing that will fit into a communities and be attractive, fit within the context of the community. And I've said this the second or third time I've given a presentation like this. Carol's a champion advocate for her community and for Milnor because we went through multiple variations of, no, that's not going to work. Yes, that works. No, don't do that. Don't look at this. But we had the ability to obtain some technical assistance with a vendor who worked with us as well as Milnor to do some modeling of that. And so the vendor put together a slide deck that I'll show you. And what we first did is kind of fit this, and it's really hard to read, but we worked with Carol to identify a couple of lots. And then we specifically zeroed in on one lot that was a vacant lot in Milnor to look at how could we place two multi-generational duplexes, side-by-side housing, on a 21,000 square foot lot and really make it configurable so that it could scale up or down, but up to 12 units within that footprint of the existing lot as part of it. And one of the things and again, this is where Carol and having a partner and a local partner who lives in that community understands it, advocates it. This is not what it was originally going to look like. Nothing like this, actually, as part of it. And Carol made sure to point that out. And why did we look at this? Because missing middle housing is really aimed at how do we find that multi-generational housing fix that workforce housing often, but also older adult housing. Could be young families with kids that can't afford a full mortgage piece yet or only want to be able to share walls. It helps increase some of the density, so it allows for flexibility. It accommodates various uses, configurations, et cetera. We'll talk about that. It's affordable. We're trying to put more density on a lot and try and continue to offer multiple housing stock. Suitability, does it fit within the neighborhood? Does it fit within the community in which we're trying to go? Walkability, something I know you heard about this morning and have heard about in past Main Street conferences. How do we make sure that if folks don't have a car, even in small town North Dakota, they have access to Main Street and shopping and things? Safety, adaptability, as part of it. So here's what we put together. Again, not super easy to see, but you can see the outline. I'll use it here. You can see the outline of the lot that we were on. And there's actually 12 units. So these front 2 units are what we call primary units. So they would be essentially look like a single family home, but it's actually a duplex, side by side duplex. Then they had on the back, parking was a big concern from Carol and Milnor. So we made sure we had parking off the alleyway as part of it with the garage. And then above the garage, we had the flexibility to add an accessible dwelling unit, also known as a granny flat, a college kid hangout, work for, these days, Airbnb rental, right? Opportunity type of situation. And then in between those, we had a studio wing, which could either be part of those main primary units or sectioned off to be a wholly sustainable, separate opportunity to have housing. So within that, you can fit 1, 2, and if you have the ADU, 3. So now you're talking 6. And then if you do 2 of those within that lot, a 12-unit opportunity for the city of Milnor to do that as part of it. One of the things I mentioned in the beginning is we wanted to talk about walkability. Again, this is hard to see, but this is where the lot was located that we did the modeling on. And then we did a walk radius, I believe, and Carol can correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of the outer range of that quarter-mile walk shed is their main street, beautiful main street. I had never been to Milnor before I was there earlier in August. Recommend it. Great little community as part of it. And then in addition, we also helped them identify at least one additional lot that some sort of missing middle type of housing could be on as part of it. And so our job was to identify it. I already talked about this is just one variation. There are other multiple variations. I talked about the way you can do it phased in, so they don't have to build it all at once. They can phase it in. They can build the single-family home with the adaptability, the sectioned-off garage, phase it in, as I talked about the studio wing, and then the ADU on top. I'm going quick because this time's going to fly, and I know others have great stuff as well. But the thing I will tell you is, so we helped them do the modeling, take a look at what would fit, what would do that. The other thing that is not in my presentation, but we have handed off to Carol and her team as part of this is, in addition, we took a quick look at their housing code to say, to do this, will there be hang-ups in their existing zoning and housing code, and help flag for them things that might be potential barriers, things that would have to be resolved, drawbacks. Thankfully, there weren't a ton. There were a few. There were some minor setback issues. Well, I shouldn't say minor. I sat on the city commission. I know how big those can turn into be. But they weren't huge code rewrites. They were just things to recognize and within the best we could fit in the form as part of it. So I went really fast. I'm going to flip it back to Carol to talk a little bit about why that was important and where they're going with it from here.
Thank you. This goes back to what Governor Burgum talked about this morning is infill and how important that is. This project would be on an empty lot within the community. It's using existing infrastructure, existing water, sewer, streets, sidewalks, all important issues when you're looking at building in your community. It's a great plan because it fits the lot well, it fits the neighborhood, residential area well. It gives people the chance to maybe age in place. Maybe they start out with the home and as they downsize into the smaller little apartment, a family member could be in the larger unit, the two-story house. Or maybe with housing costs as it is, maybe you rent out part of it and that helps make the house payment. So there are some very good reasons that this would be a great situation. It's configured well for that area, and I guess that's probably most of what I've had to say. Thank you.
Shawn, I just want to add one additional comment that I failed to mention. One of the things the pandemic taught us too is more and more, we've known this for a long time, but older adults want to stay and age in their community. They want to stay in their home for as long as they safely can. If they can't stay in their home, they want to stay in their community. And we're seeing a growth, yes, in North Dakota of multi-generational homes and multi-generational families. And so one of the benefits of this type of design, and Carol touched on this, but just to do, We saw, and you saw it in census counts in nursing homes, census counts in nursing homes declined. There were lots of reasons for that, some very bad, which I won't touch on here, but some of it was families saying, we want them to be at home and be with us and see that. And you're going to only see that grow and expand. And so missing middle housing is an opportunity to get back into that as well.
Carol and Josh, I just want to say thank you for covering that. I also wanted to mention, which I failed to do at the beginning, is we really want to address your questions. And so at the end, after all the presentations are done, we really want to hear from you. And Sarah Adi Coleman's out there somewhere with a microphone, and she's happy to bring that microphone to you so that you can ask us any questions you'd like. When you do, just simply try to, if it's a panel, that's great. But if it's to a specific individual, just mention that in your question. So what we'd like to do next is go to Matt Marshall. Matt does economic development for MinnKota Power. He has been very involved in housing, and he's going to relate some of his experiences with that effort. Matt?
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk about something that we're all very passionate about, and that's trying to figure out the housing situation we have. It's critical when it comes to workforce development. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some challenges that are experienced outside of our larger populated areas. Certainly the Fargo, Bismarck, Grand Fork, Minot's, Dickinson's of the world, they have their own housing challenges. We talk often about them, but I'm going to take it from a little bit different angle and talk about smaller communities, some issues they run into, and how to make something happen with the current toolkit that we have. There's some great legislation that's being discussed. I think we're going to touch on it today. Everyone should get out and support that, but we have some tools today that we can work with and try and get some progress. So, really, I think it's important to understand the challenges. And when you get outside Fargo's larger areas, like I mentioned, there's a thing called appraisal gaps. And what that is a bank can only loan to an appraised value. And if you have a value that's, let's say you spend $10 million to build a property and you're planning on debt financing that entire $10 million, and your appraisal comes back and says, well, it's really only worth $7 million based on our assessment. Now all of a sudden the max you can go to from a banking perspective is at $7 million. You have to figure out that gap. That's a very real thing in our rural communities because there aren't, when they use, there aren't cost comparisons or costs are generally higher. Their sales comparisons don't exist. And then the revenue side of an appraisal sometimes isn't available because there's just old inventory. The other thing is the lack of local capital. And this is something I'd love for everyone to really think about. One of the things that we overlook in our state is that we have extraordinary people that are willing to invest back in our state. But there's a lot of capital that comes from our rural areas and goes into Fargo, goes into Bismarck, goes into Grand Forks. And that is a great thing. But I have had developers say to me, well, I have investors that are from all of these areas, Matt, and you want me to go back and do a project. How come they don't want to put their money there? Why am I putting my money there if they don't believe in that? And I think that's a real question that I'm not insinuating that people that work hard for their money shouldn't put their money into our larger metro areas, but there should be some strategic thought when we think about our rural areas and trying to keep some of that capital local. And we'll talk about that. It's generally more expensive to build in rural areas, even though sometimes the perception is that it's cheaper. And the older inventory that tends to be in these rural areas keeps those rents lower. Again, that impacts the appraisal, and then it works against us when we're trying to attract capital into that area. So what I want to do is talk about understanding, the toolkit that we have right now. And so when you start thinking about the extra expenses that it might cost to build in a rural area, developers will often say, hey, I can build a home or a duplex or an apartment building in a large metro area. I'm not shipping any of my labor 60 or 100 miles. So I inherit none of that cost, and it's going to sell just the same here. Why would I inherit that cost? I'm not going to make any more money in a rural area than I am here. It's a very real question. But there are opportunities. If you're a community or a county that has access to land, that's the first thing you can do to try and bridge that gap, because in, of course, those larger metro areas, they're paying a premium for land and infrastructure. And so if you can get that land well below market value or free if that's an option, that's the first thing you can do to bring that gap into alignment and get their eyebrows raised. There are also tools available, and we could talk for 45 minutes about tax increment financing. It's a wonderful tool. You know, this is a way that you can lower the cost of that land using their own operating budgets, and you can also upgrade the infrastructure that goes into that parcel, creating a build-ready site. But you know, that takes some explaining within your political subdivisions, and so, but that's available, and that's a great tool. Just another note on tax increment financing, you know, your community may need to bond for those costs up front. There's lots of resources out there, and I can help anybody who has a question with that. But in order for a development group to come in or a local development group to put a project together, those costs may need to be taken away. Just a simple tax abatement, which a lot of communities are familiar with, might not fit the bill. Hitting the wrong button, my apologies. Next is addressing your older inventory. And so you're going to hear a lot about housing studies, and Shawn, a part of the program, they're going to talk about housing studies are very important. I know Carol's working with a group. Not every community has the ability to fund a housing study, and I have been in meetings with bankers and developers where they look at that study and go, we don't really know. It just depends on the value of the study. But there's things you can do to, one, help the bank, and then two, help the development group figure out how to fund something. And it involves sweat equity. It takes going out and meeting with your local businesses, figuring out how many employees they have that are commuting, figuring out a way to ask the tough questions about wages and could they afford, could they afford a little more expensive apartment or, twin home or whatever that's going to be. Talk to your schools, your hospitals. Who's commuting in? Build an inventory list of potential renters. And I can tell you that goes miles. One, from a development group standpoint, and two, from a banking standpoint, to know, hey, I've got a running list. These are real people. These are real scenarios. We know if right now their needs are not being met. The next thing, and that's basically, it's not a real housing study, but it's darn close to one. And in some cases, that's the best you'll get. The next is, get a letter of intent if that's a possibility from those individuals. So it's not wrong to go out and ask them, hey, if we had a place to live, would you move here? What would it take? What are your needs? And then the best is a pre-lease if it's available, but that's kind of the gold standard and it solves a lot of problems. So again, we touched briefly earlier on the appraisal gaps. And again, when banks hire an appraisal to do debt financing on any building, large or small, those appraisers are going to go out and they're going to use the cost approach, an income approach, and a sales approach, the sales comparison approach. And they sort of combine all that information and they come up with a value. And if that value is not what it costs to build, that's where you get that gap. And banks can't go above that appraised value. And so what happens is you can get moving along with a project and then find out, well, this project's going to cost me $10 million for easy math, and I'm planning on debt financing it, so we're going to come up with $7.5 million of that $10 million. And then all of a sudden, the appraisal comes back and they go, well, it's only worth $7 million. Well, now they're only going to debt finance 75% of that $7 million, and you've got this big equity gap that you got to go out and figure out how to fill. Well, there are in some cases, you can get what's called subdebt. Subdebt is a second position that comes in on a loan, and some banks will allow that to come in as equity. Not in every case, but in some banks that's possible. And some great places to look for subdebt would be your JDAs. Rural electric cooperatives are a great access to that. Lewis and Clark, for example, if they serve your community, they can come in on a subdebt option. Bank of North Dakota, I keep pushing and asking. I think if we all beg, maybe we can get a program. And then on occasion, there are city or county funds that can be added in a subdebt position. So, and again, we could talk about this for hours, but I just wanted to give you some real quick ideas on how to close those gaps and some strategies that we're using in other areas. Lack of local investment. I think the why matters. And so as you're out meeting with your stakeholders, people need to understand, why are we doing this? Why are we at the Main Street Initiative? Why is this event important at all? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about a map that you're looking at here, and this is a declining population map. And so if you're white or a shade of green, white is basically no change. You're not growing nor declining. Any shade of red or orange is a declining population. And so you can see we have large sections of our state that are either not growing in any tangible way or declining. And I'm sure there's a lot of city administrators out here, county administrators, school administrators, and we're preaching to the choir. But the average property owner or citizen doesn't understand that, as populations decline, property taxes, which are generally the number one thing you'll hear any state legislator reference, there's only one way for those to go, and that's up. Fewer people, fixed costs continue to rise. We're not, it's the world we live in. We're never going to convince, gas prices to go down. We don't influence that. But as those fixed prices continue to rise and you have fewer and fewer people, your taxes go up. So what's one way to combat that? Well, we either raise taxes or we incentivize growth and we bring people in. One benchmark, which is the school funding benchmark, if you have a classroom in a class and you lose 10 kids, you still have a teacher in that class, you still have a building that you have to heat. Guess what? You've lost 10 kids worth of state funding. That gets made up through property taxes. When people start to understand that, they change their view of, well, what does it matter if people are moving out of here and they're not coming back? How do we influence that? Well, it costs us money not to influence it. That's why we're sitting here today at the Main Street Initiative, and that's why this is so important. And so really getting an understanding of how budgets work and what are the tax realities within the communities that you live in so that you can explain that to stakeholders, and that's going to help keep that capital in town. People are going to say, well, if I'm investing here, I'm investing in myself. I'm saving myself from increased costs. And there's other issues, and we can't go through them all today, but in smaller communities, sometimes there's a lack of contractors available. Again, that pushes that pressure on costs going up when you build. There are local bankers, sometimes in small towns, I love all of our local bankers, but they may not have, a lot of experience in doing development type lending. And so having either the Bank of North Dakota or a larger bank come in and help that local banker sometimes is a great way to help them figure out how to get it through their credit committees. They may be real familiar with other types of loaning, but sometimes development loaning is a little unique. Infrastructure that's not ready for development, you'll hear all of us preach reuse existing infrastructure. That's always better. Well, not always, but mostly. And Shawn will backhand me for saying that, but the reality is you get into communities and sometimes that infrastructure is not ready for a larger development. And so you have to rip up what's there and rebuild. And so, sometimes that's an issue. There are ways around it. There's, funding pools out there, or again, tax increment financing can help take a big bite out of that. But you run into that from time to time. Zoning issues. you know, if you're an advocate or a champion, and I say that because not everybody's professional staff working on this, you might just be a concerned citizen. To the best of the extent you can, go learn your zoning laws and understand what the challenges are, and start those conversations early rather than getting a project and then trying to muddle your way through it. And then, you know, you'll see a lot of sites that are not large enough to build on. That goes back to that zoning issue. You know, can you create a variance or another zoning code or you name it? And if you start those discussions earlier, that really helps. So some basic takeaways, you know, do the best you can to get to know the basics of financing development. Understand what an appraisal gap is. Try and figure out what a cap rate is. Those are things that when you're in the development world and you're thinking about real estate, it's important to know what those are, so when you're talking to a prospect, you kind of live their world a little bit and can speak their language. Understand the toolkit that's available today. Shawn's going to go out and get us some great tools, and I'm sure they're coming. Lord willing, the legislature grants them. But there are tools today, and you can apply them. They're a lot of hard work to try and get them to fit, but they're available. And then understand the why. That's, if there's one thing I could leave you with, understand why you're doing it, why it's so important, how it has a broader impact to the economy, and be able to articulate that to stakeholders so that they understand that they have a vested stake in growth, development, attracting workforce. Because sometimes, to be honest, it's not intuitive. If you're not living it every day, you don't think about it. You just say, you know what, my taxes keep going up and it makes me upset, and now you want me to invest here or raise my taxes more to, or allow this tax incentive. Why would I care about that? Well, doing nothing costs a lot of money as well. And in a lot of our state, doing nothing is increasing the cost not only at the state legislature, but locally as well. And we need people to understand that and take control of their own destiny. And a good place to start understanding that is meet with your cities, counties, schools, understand their budgets, and that'll help you articulate the why. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt. Just so everybody knows, Matt, before he started working for MinnKota, also worked in West Fargo doing economic development there. So he did a lot of work, and I think one of his claims to fame is understanding the data. He really understood what value meant after construction to all of those taxing entities. What does it mean when you get a mixed-use development at this value, and comparing that to a single-family development, and how does that all work together to improve not only your housing stock, but also your property tax that comes into a community. So thank you, Matt, for that work. Thank you for what you're doing now. I'm going to go last, so I'm going to talk about some of the things that that Matt referred to later, but I'd really like Dave to talk next. Dave is probably one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to housing, because he runs the North Dakota Housing and Finance Agency here in North Dakota. He's been doing this, he's been in this game a long time, and he's going to talk about an existing program that is wildly popular, and maybe even some adjustments that could be made to that program to address some of the needs that were identified by the task force. So Dave, would you like to go next?
Okay, sure. Thanks for the kind introduction, Shawn. Knowledgeable, boy, that's a lot to live up to. Hi, a couple things. Our agency, we are a state agency. We don't receive any state general fund money. We pay our own way, but we sell bonds. We buy mortgages from banks. That's where we make our money at. That pays and helps support other programs that we have for development of housing across the state, rehab, single-family homes, multifamily development. And we also have started working with the homeless service providers across the state starting about 3 years ago. So we're kind of going from people that are experiencing homeless all the way up to homeowners is what we cover. We've been in existence for 40 years. And I've been there almost that whole time. Oh boy.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Thanks, Josh. Okay. Anyway, so Shawn alluded to a program that we administer on behalf of the state. It's the Housing Incentive Fund. It's been around since 2011. It was created by the legislature in response to the oil boom, energy boom in western North Dakota. And that's primarily where it was focused at for the last decade almost. And it was about developing housing. You know, there was just a shortage period in Western North Dakota. Well, and you had to slow down. The program was funded in either an appropriation or in tax credits. Right now, the legislature has been appropriating funds for it. They did not appropriate anything in 2017-19. They appropriated $7.5 million. In 21, they appropriated $9.5 million. That money's out the door the day we put out there for, you know, submit your funding application packages. That money's gone. And a lot of it's taken up by a need in the larger communities for extremely low-income households. You know, that's one of the growth populations that we have. It's needed, but what happens with it then is because the Fargos and the Bismarcks and the Minotts and the Grand Forks, they've got projects that are ready to go. They've got developers in those communities that have got shovel-ready projects. They're going to score well on any application. And it fills a gap with our other development programs like low-income housing tax credits, the home program, et cetera. So what happens with the rural areas, even though we have a rural set-aside for it, is that the rural communities, they need, as Matt just talked about, planning is a big deal in the rural areas because you've got to go through, can we make this work, right? And that money's gone. It's not there. It's not there for that gap filler for a rural project. You know, the last funding we had from 21, we funded one rural project in Rolla. It was a rehab of an existing project up there. So the idea with the Housing Incentive Fund would be to create an ongoing source or a large chunk of money that could be used over several years. So that would enable us to, number one, look at what would be needed, or have a larger set aside for rural that would let them plan. They then would know that, hey, there's money possibly available for us when we apply, you know, 2 years from now, knowing that it's, you know, like now it's gone and will the legislature appropriate any money for it again? So they can't do that planning. So we'd like to see the best case scenario would be an ongoing steady source or that large chunk of money that's good over a few bienniums. Now the program is set up that it's a revolving fund, so the legislature can appropriate money. It doesn't all have to go out within that biennium. It could stay there. They could have an ongoing source of money for several years. That would be the ideal scenario to allow for that planning. And there's the Rural Housing Task Force that Shawn talked about. The idea there would be to have like $40 million every biennium for the next 5 bienniums. I believe there's probably going to be a senator that's going to be proposing a bill along that same line. It also has been specifically dedicated just for multifamily housing up to this point. And the bill that's probably going to be proposed will also make put it as an eligible activity single-family housing, where you could rehab single-family housing and do something closer to what, you know, Josh and Carol are looking at in Milnor. So you know, there'll be talk about that on what to do with HIF. I'm sure the legislature is going to have a lot of people asking for funding, a lot of good projects. But housing is very important, as you're hearing today. So that's as the administrator of that Housing Incentive Fund, that's what we would like to see going forward, is just that steady and ongoing commitment to housing, not forever, just for a few years to see how it works. And then the other thing, if you go to our website at ndhfa.org, we just had a housing needs assessment that was done in conjunction with NDSU Research Center, did this with us. We unveiled it at a housing forum a couple weeks ago. Go out to our website, ndhfa.org. It's out there. And if you have any questions on it, you can call us. It's a housing needs assessment. So it's looking at what the current trends are. It's not making a lot of projections. They just projected through 2025 on what housing needs may be. It shows that we're short like 9,000 housing units that should be built in the next 2 years. Well, that's not going to happen, so we're short of housing. But if you look at it from a rural perspective, they're looking at trends, and it may see that your community is going to not grow or it might be shrinking in population, but that's not your destiny. You can change that by what's going on in your community and what you take the initiative to do, as you know, like Milnor's trying to do here. It's a great idea that they have with this housing that Josh has helped them work up. So I'll turn it back to you, Shawn.
All right, thank you, Dave. I've got 5 minutes to talk about a new program that we would like to introduce to everybody. And this is a proposed new program. This is something that if you like what you hear today, I would like to enlist your support because we're going to need to have legislative support to make it happen. Before I go into that, I want to mention 2 existing tools that might be able to help with creating single-family homes in your communities. And those are Renaissance Zone and sales tax. So I don't know. I assume that almost every community now has a local option sales tax in your communities. If you don't, it is an option. You heard Matt talk about having local skin in the game. That's a great source of funds for having skin in the game because it's only restricted by the vote itself. So however you, when you write that and go to your public for a vote, that's up to you. You can put as many restrictions or as few restrictions as you want on that vote. So it's a great tool if you're not using it, or if you're at 1%, you can think about 0.5% to support local housing. The other one, the Renaissance Zone, is another good tool. It provides a 5-year property tax abatement in certain circumstances. You get to control what that looks like, so the level of investment is up to you for somebody to get that full 5 years. You don't have to give every project 5 years. You might be able to give them 2. You can figure that out. It's up to you. It's flexible. Depending on the project, they might also get a 5-year income tax abatement. So I just wanted to throw those 2 things out there before I talked about the other project. And you might have heard the governor talk about it during his opening remarks today. And, you know, Matt mentioned start with why, so I'm going to do that first. And then I'll explain the program and then the benefits. The reason that we went down this path is because we needed to provide workforce housing, and the gap that Dave just mentioned of 9,000 units shy of what we need. We need to identify what does workforce housing look like, because it's not the same in every community. It might be duplexes in one community, it's single-family homes in a lot of communities, but it might be 4plexes, 8plexes, 24plexes in other communities. So, but the bottom line is, the workforce that wants to come into your community to meet your needs a place to live. And you need to figure out, what does that look like? What is the most attractive to the type of workforce that you're trying to bring into your community? The next is it eliminates blight and hazardous situations. And we'll get into the mechanics here pretty quick. The other is it utilizes existing infrastructure. One of the most expensive things that a city can do, of course, is put in new infrastructure, because it's not only the cost of the initial placement, but it's also the cost of the maintenance over the life of that infrastructure. So we need to remember that when you make those investments, it's a 50-year investment. It's not just a construction cost. The next is it drives local purchasing. Whenever you build a new house in a community, it's got to be filled. So it needs appliances, it needs carpet, it needs linoleum, it needs paint, it needs all these other things. So it provides a rising tide in your community. And then it increases vibrancy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the program now so you can understand a little bit better about how it does these things. So our goal is to provide money for 3 tiers of communities, 1,000 and less, 1,000 to 2,500, and 2,500 to 5,000. So this is a rural program that we're proposing. Those are the tiers. In each of those tiers, we want to work with at least, anywhere from 15 cities in that first tier of 1,000 and less, 12 communities in that 1,000 to 2,500, and then at least 2 cities in that 2,500 to 5,000. And honestly, when we say 2, there's not that many in that population category. So that's really about half of the communities. What we want to do is provide you with money to do a workforce housing study in your community. So what is the workforce that you're trying to find a housing solution for? Is that workforce in your community? Is it in another community? Or excuse me, is the business that needs workforce in your community? Is it an adjacent community? Are they trying to attract blue-collar workers, white-collar workers? What does it look like? And then what kind of housing is going to be most attractive to them? And once you have that answer, we want to work with you to provide dollars to identify blighted properties in your community or vacant parcels. That would be an option as well. And then we're going to provide you with $22,500 per parcel to clean up that parcel. So if there's an existing house on it that is abandoned and or is causing a hazard to others in the community, you can utilize those dollars to either remediate asbestos that might be in there, knock down that building, do whatever you need to do to make sure that they have a vacant parcel so that it's now bare land. That's our goal. You in turn then have to find a builder to provide that land to, but it has to be free to that builder. So they don't have that cost of acquisition of land. And we'd like to replicate that in 5 different parcels in your community. We recognize that there might be issues. Your front footage, your zoning, there's rules that don't allow a house to be built on that particular parcel. In that situation, we'll allow one parcel to be used for some other public purpose. Maybe you want to put community gardens on it. Maybe you want to put a veterans memorial. Maybe you want to put some other kind of pocket park. We will allow that, and you can use the $22,500 for that. So I'm sorry we're over time, but the same holds true for the other 2 tiers of population levels. The difference is the number of parcels. So in the second tier, it's 10 parcels instead of 5, and the amount per parcel is $30,000 instead of $22,500. And in the third tier, it's 15 parcels and $50,000 per parcel. So that's really fast. The mechanism of how we want to allow you to eliminate blight, create bare land, which then turns into housing for your communities and the workforce that you need to bring. So we're over time, so unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to have questions asked from the public, but I do know that our panel is going to be around, so I encourage you to grab them and ask questions of them individually, and I really want to say thank you to everybody up here who sat on that task force and for donating your time today. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, everyone.